The wind howled against the glass of Whitaker Tower as amber light from the autumn sunset turned Lake Michigan red. Sophie, a young girl in a wheelchair, stared blankly ahead, then suddenly laughed when Jax, a homeless boy, clumsily hopped along the resonance path. Each tile rang with a strange melody, as if summoning Margaret's spirit. Graham, the billionaire father, stood frozen, his heart trembling at the smile he thought was gone forever. But deep in the shadowed corridor, a pair of cold eyes tightened around a radio, whispering a chilling threat. A seed of danger had just been planted. Who was stalking this hidden garden? The wind from Lake Michigan slammed against the massive glass panes of Whitaker Tower, whistling through the steel seams with a blade-sharp chill. On the rooftop garden, lavender stalks bent and trembled, their earthy scent mixing with damp concrete. Chicago's sky darkened as crimson light from the setting sun bled across the distant water. Then came Sophie Whitaker's laugh, her first in months, a sudden shaft of sunlight piercing the clouds. But who had brought it back? A heavy maintenance door clanked open. Jax Rivera slipped through the narrow gap, his bare feet dusty against the freezing tiles. His clothes were torn, his knees covered in scars, yet his eyes burned with the defiance of someone gambling everything. He paused, chest heaving, breath swallowed by the howl of the wind. Before him lay flower beds, stone benches, and Sophie, silent in her wheelchair, eyes vacant as she gazed at the lake. Jax drew a deep breath, then spun around. His arms flailed like clumsy wings, one foot sliding deliberately, his body toppling awkwardly before springing upright like a fool in a street show. Sweat beaded on his brow, chilled instantly by the wind. Sophie blinked. Her lips twitched. A fragile laugh slipped out, thin, transparent, like a wind chime rattling in a storm. She clapped her small hands, cheeks flushed, her face glowing as though sunlight had risen inside her. From the balcony above, Graham Whitaker froze mid-step. His daughter's laugh, the sound he thought was gone forever, stabbed his chest like a blade. He gripped the railing, his dark silhouette stretched across the glass. How long had it been? That sound broke him open, painful and tender, all at once. But how had a ragged boy slipped in here? The question cut at him. Then Sophie laughed again, louder, echoing against the glass walls, filling the silent garden with life. Jax rolled across the tiles, faking another clumsy fall, arms swinging wildly. "Look at this!" he shouted, his voice half lost in the wind. Sophie giggled harder, clapping weak but eager hands. Salt from sweat stung Jax's lips, yet hunger in his belly faded when he saw her eyes light up. He kept leaping, awkward but sincere, each step a wordless promise. The glass doors swung open with a harsh click. Graham strode onto the terrace, amber light casting his face in cold stone. His eyes slashed across Jax like a knife. Sophie startled, her hands clutching the wheels of her chair. "Father, please don't send him away." Her trembling voice carried tears. Graham halted, his shadow stretching over the boy's thin frame. Jax stood still, shoulders quivering, but his gaze held steady. "Name?" Graham asked, his tone deep as the lake. "Jax Rivera, sir," the boy answered, voice trembling yet firm. The wind caught his words, making them fragile, but they held. Graham's jaw tightened. His stare drilled into the boy. "Why are you here?" he pressed, each word sharp as iron. Jax swallowed hard, chest rising. "I saw her sad. I thought, if I danced, she might laugh. I didn't take anything." His eyes shone with unshaken truth. The air stretched taut as a snapped string, the wind scattering lavender petals across the tiles. Sophie turned to her father, pleading, "Please, let him stay." Her broken cry hammered at Graham's pride. He stood silent, torn between anger and the softness he refused to admit. His chest felt heavy, but his daughter's laughter still rang inside him, pulling him from his frozen depths. He sighed, shoulders sagging. "Stay where I can see you." "Leave after dinner," he said, his voice easing a shade. Sophie squealed softly, clapping in triumph. Jax bowed, relief washing over his frail frame, his eyes flickering with hope. Garden lights warmed the stone, painting the terrace with a golden glow. Jax danced on, movements clumsy yet bursting with life, sweat sliding into the cold wind. Sophie clapped along, her weak rhythm like a drum beating against the storm. In the shadows, Graham crossed his arms, silent. He watched his daughter sit taller, her face radiant. Inside him, a thick sheet of ice cracked, a thin shoot of hope breaking through. But at the far end of the hall, Hank Dwyer approached, eyes narrow as blades. His hand gripped the radio tight as he whispered, "How did a street kid make it up here?" His voice dripped with suspicion. Still, Sophie's laughter rang out, pure against the roar of the lake. Hank's eyes glinted with cold calculation, his lips curling in a secretive smile. The wind whipped harder, tearing lavender petals into the night. Beneath the soft amber light, two lives had just intertwined, while a hidden fire quietly began to burn. Under the glittering glow of crystal chandeliers, the long dining table gleamed beneath a white cloth, shining like Lake Michigan at night. The scent of roasted meat mingled with red wine, but the air felt heavy, as though the lake's cold had seeped through the massive glass walls of Whitaker Tower. Jax Rivera had been allowed to stay for dinner, yet suspicion from the hallway still clung to him. Sophie kept smiling, but her laughter now seemed fragile. Jax sat at the far end, shoulders hunched, his bare feet tucked tight beneath the chair. The silver fork in his hand shook, its stained handle clinking sharply against the plate. Hunger clawed at his stomach, but every strike of knife and fork reminded him he didn't belong here. Sweat trickled down his temple, stinging as it slid across his cheek. Sophie tilted her head, her eyes glowing like small lamps in the dark. "Jax, tell us about your dance today." Her voice was clear, filled with encouragement. He smiled faintly, ready to stand and spin clumsily like he had on the rooftop. But a voice lashed across the room like a whip. "A street kid, eating at the Whitakers' table? What a joke!" Hank Dwyer stood in the doorway, his broad frame blocking the light, lips curled in contempt. The air froze, as if Lake Michigan's wind had stolen the breath from the room. Sophie gasped, her hands gripping the wheelchair tightly. "Don't say that!" Her voice trembled, her eyes shining with tears. Jack sat rigid, his face burning, his fingers squeezing the fork until his knuckles whitened. From the fragile hope born of Sophie's laughter, he plunged into shame. The worn fabric at his shoulder seemed to weigh him down, pinning him to the chair. Graham Whitaker set his wineglass down, the brittle sound of crystal striking wood echoing in the silence. His gaze cut toward Hank, sharp as a blade. "That's enough. He'll leave after dinner," he said, his tone low but firm, like frozen water at the lake's depths. Hank shrugged, a thin smile still playing at his mouth as he turned away. The air remained heavy, like an unseen block of ice hanging above them. Jax bowed his head, forcing down a bite of meat stuck in his throat. The smoky tang burned his nose, making him want to retch. Still, he forced a smile for Sophie and whispered, "It's fine, as long as you're happy." The words were quiet but steady, a flickering flame against the cold. Sophie pressed her lips together, her eyes glowing with gratitude as her small hand clutched her father's. Graham didn't answer. He only watched his daughter, his expression unreadable, like ripples across a dark lake. Sophie squeezed harder, her voice soft. "Father, I want Jax to stay longer." He tapped the rim of his glass, torn between tenderness and the wall of pride built over the years. Sophie's fragile hope wavered, her searching eyes clouded with fear. When dinner ended, Jack slipped out to the rooftop garden. The wind from the lake roared, carrying the damp scent of concrete. He sat on the cold stone steps, knees drawn to his chest, staring at the resonance path glowing faintly in the amber lights. Each tile once sang Margaret's melody, but now only the wind remained. Footsteps sounded behind him, slow but heavy. Graham paused, his tall shadow stretching across the tiles as he studied the boy huddled against Chicago's chill. Farther back, Hank emerged from the dark hall, his radio blinking red in his hand. He smirked, whispering, "Tomorrow, I'll prove he doesn't belong here." The wind swallowed his words, but his eyes gleamed sharp as freshly ground steel. Sophie rolled out, the thin blanket on her lap flapping in the gusts. She touched Jax's shoulder, her voice trembling. "You'll come back, won't you?" Jax looked up, eyes damp but shining beneath the garden light. He nodded, a silent promise. Sophie smiled, her tiny hand squeezing his as though holding him against the storm. Graham stood in silence, arms crossed, his stare locked on the two children. Inside him, another crack split the ice, though the wall had not yet fallen. At the edge of shadow, Hank tightened his grip on the radio, his eyes burning with resolve. Sophie's laughter still echoed faintly, but now it carried a thread of unseen menace. The garden lights flickered, their amber glow trembling on the stone. A soul had just been saved, but a hidden blade had already been drawn. Morning light streamed through the towering glass walls of Whitaker Tower, spilling gold across the rooftop garden. The damp lavender, heavy with last night's rain, blended with the cold tang of steel, a whisper from the city itself. Jax Rivera stood barefoot on the tiles, his toes trembling in the chill. Sophie's gaze from her wheelchair urging him forward like a small beacon. Yesterday, he had brought her laughter back, yet Hank Dwyer's shadow still lingered in the corridors, planting seeds of doubt. Jax drew a deep breath and stepped onto the resonance path. A low, steady tone rang out, tick, tick, notes slipping into the wind. He spun, arms wide, his clumsy dance pulsing with the rhythm beneath his feet. Sophie laughed, clapping her hands, then suddenly pushed her wheels, chest rising, shoulders straining as if to join him. The breeze carried her clear laughter, and the garden seemed alive again. Dr. Elena Ruiz, standing by the flower beds, scribbled notes with astonishment. Her inner drive is returning. This is what we've been waiting for, she whispered with hope. Graham Whitaker stood in the sunlight, his dark silhouette etched across the glass. His chest tightened, pulled back to the days when Margaret had carefully laid each stone, and years of pouring money into medicine had never given him this. A radiant glow on his daughter's face. A ragged boy's foolish dance had done what he could not. Inside him, despair shifted to a fragile spark of hope, like sunlight through a narrow pane. But at the garden's edge, Hank Dwyer folded his arms, his eyes narrowed like blades. His shoes struck sharply against the concrete as he moved toward security. See that? A street kid stomping on Mrs. Whitaker's legacy, he hissed, voices cutting as lake wind. One guard glanced up, uneasy. Hank pressed harder. Today, he makes her laugh. Tomorrow, missing valuables, headlines in the papers. His words spread like fire, sparking doubt. In mid-spin, Jax caught the icy stairs. He froze, a chill of sweat sliding down his back. His joy, just blossomed, began to wilt. By dusk, Sophie wheeled herself to the rhythm of the tiles, each turn a fragile effort. Suddenly, Hank strode out, his voice booming for the guards to hear. Sir, letting a street boy trample on Mrs. Whitaker's legacy is an insult. The air thickened. Even the steady tick of the resonance path sounded lost. Jack stopped cold, sweat dripping down his brow, his bare feet glued to the tiles. Don't say that, Sophie cried, her voice shaking. He's helping me practice again. Hank sneered, lips curling. Helping? Or taking advantage? Who knows what he drags in from the streets? The guards traded uneasy glances. A few nodded faintly. Jax felt the garden collapsing around him, a wall of judgment pressing down. A boy who once used smiles to fight hunger now stood exposed, cornered under every stare. From radiant hope, he plummeted into shame. Sophie broke down, clutching her chair, her shoulders trembling. Graham clenched his fists, his stare cutting across Hank, but his lips stayed sealed, torn between pride and love. His chest grew heavier. Sophie's pleading eyes couldn't draw a word from him. Jax lowered his face, his dusty feet rooted like nails to the stone. The resonance path fell silent, replaced by an unnerving stillness. He wanted to shout, to resist, but his throat locked tight. His eyes sparked, finding Sophie's a silent vow. I won't leave. Yet Graham's silence pressed like an unspoken verdict. The garden glowed in trembling orange light as the sun slipped low. Jax retreated into the shadows while Sophie sobbed in Mrs. Patel's arms. Graham turned away, his grip crushing the railing, darkness gathering in his eyes. From the balcony, Hank's voice rang out, loud enough for Jax to hear. Tomorrow, I'll prove he doesn't belong here. The lake wind gusted hard, scattering lavender petals across the tiles. Sophie choked out softly. Jax, Don't leave me. He turned back, his eyes wet, shining in the sunset glow. Yet no words came. The laughter reborn only yesterday now flickered like a candle in a storm. A hidden scheme was taking shape, and Jax, standing in the windswept garden, clenched his fists, his gaze trembling between fear and defiance. Chicago's night wind screamed, rattling the steel rails and carrying the metallic chill into the rooftop office. The air reeked of old paper, mingling with the damp scent from Lake Michigan. A golden lamp stretched Graham Whitaker's shadow long across the wall, spilling light onto files scattered wide across his desk. Jax Rivera now stood accused of dishonoring the family's legacy, though Sophie's pleading eyes still burned like a fragile lantern in the storm of doubt. A new danger hung over him. Graham returned from a brief call, his heavy steps stopping short. The glass case on his desk sat empty. Margaret's antique watch, her sacred keepsake, was gone. A draft swept through a cracked window, rattling loose papers like a cruel laugh at his carelessness. No, it can't be, he muttered, gripping the chair hard, his eyes dark as a frozen lake. Hank Dwyer appeared at the doorway, his broad frame filling the space. I warned you, his voice snapped like cold steel. Let a stray wander near, and this day was bound to come. Graham spun, fury swelling, though shock still weighed him down. Hank dropped a stack of security logs on the desk, timestamps of Jax slipping through side halls, proof of him near the garden. He was on this floor at that time. What more do you need? Hank pressed, his eyes narrowing. The pages slapped in the wind, each turn striking Graham's ears like a verdict. Jax was dragged forward, trembling at the threshold, his ragged shirt clinging to him. I didn't take it, he cried, his voice cracking with panic. I don't even know this room. Hank stepped closer, stale smoke clinging to him. You've survived by scavenging, haven't you? Something like that watch could feed you for months. Jax's face flushed, tears welling, his throat locked tight. From the pride of making Sophie laugh, he plummeted into humiliation, stripped bare under the lights. Sophie wheeled in fast, her chair screeching, her voice breaking with sobs. No! Jax would never do that. She grabbed Graham's hand, her nails digging into his skin, begging him to believe. Graham froze, his heart twisting. On one side, Margaret's watch, the last thread to warmth he once knew. On the other hand, Sophie's clear eyes were wholly trusting in the boy. His soul split, hope collapsing into ruthless darkness. Dr. Elena Ruiz appeared on the balcony, watching Sophie fight against the accusation. Her progress depends on trust, she said softly, her voice steady. Don't break it now. Hank cut in, his tone pounding like a hammer. Sir, Whitaker and Company is under scrutiny. A theft inside your home? What will the shareholders say? The wind hammered the glass, driving Graham toward a corner with no escape. His knuckles whitened around the chair, eyes locked on the empty case. Hank pointed at Jax, summoning guards. There's your thief. I saw him wandering near this room. Whispers rippled through the guards. Street kids can't be trusted. Jax longed to shout back, but his legs shook, his back pressed hard against the wall. Shame carved into him like 1,000 unseen blades. Sophie screamed, voice breaking. Stop it! All of you, stop! She lunged forward, but her wheels caught on the tiles, her body trembling with cold sweat. A young guard brought forward hallway footage. The grainy clip flickered, shaky, showing Jax moving past the office corridor. Hank clapped his hands, lips curling. There! Clear as day. But when slowed, the angle revealed another narrow hall leading toward the laundry, where a faint shadow moved, too blurred to identify. Graham's eyes narrowed, suspicion stirring like a crack of light through storm clouds. Hank's voice sliced in again. A street kid here. A family heirloom gone. What's left to discuss? Sophie cried out, her voice breaking. No! Someone set him up, but her words drowned beneath the howl of wind slamming the windows. Jax stepped back, heart pounding wildly, his spine pressed flat against the wall. From protest, he slid into despair, like prey about to be swallowed. Graham stepped closer, his gaze drilling through Jax as if searching for truth. The room went still, the only sound the whine of air squeezing through the frame, carrying the acrid dust. He had to choose. Defend his family's honor and company, or believe in the boy who gave his daughter back her smile. His hand closed around the empty case, his fingers trembling. Jax lifted his chin, eyes wet but unflinching. Sophie sobbed, shaking her head in despair. The air grew suffocating. Graham opened his mouth, but the words never came, swallowed whole by the cold wind. Night fell over Whitaker Tower as the wind from Lake Michigan sliced through steel seams, sharp as a blade. The rooftop garden lay in shadow, lit only by pale lamps casting faint gold across Jax Rivera's dirt-streaked face. Hank Dwyer's accusation of thief still echoed, stabbing at his chest. Yet Sophie rolled close, carrying with her the fragile glow of hope. Jax crouched in the corner, shoulders trembling, eyes wet under the light. The smell of damp grass and concrete filled his lungs, but it did nothing to ease the wound inside. Sophie pushed her chair forward, her small hand trembling as it touched his shoulder. "Jax, don't cry. I know you didn't do it." Her voice cracked, carried by the bitter wind like salt pressed into pain. Jax drew a deep breath, his chest rising hard. He didn't speak, only met Sophie's gaze, a faint spark flickering in his eyes. At least one person still believed in him. From despair, warmth returned, a small flame bracing against the storm. Graham Whitaker stepped onto the terrace, his shadow stretching across the stone. Light from inside spilled across the empty glass case he gripped tightly. His eyes were heavy, torn between doubt and love, frozen as the lake in winter. Jax looked up, his voice hoarse but firm. "I didn't take the watch. My mother taught me, dance to ease the pain and never hide a crime." He paused, his eyes burning bright. "I'd never do anything to steal Sophie's smile." The words were soft, but they rang like a vow in the cold air. Graham shuddered faintly, as if hearing Margaret's whisper about music and movement healing more than medicine ever could. By morning, sunlight poured over the garden, glinting off the resonance path. Jax didn't dance. He sat on the cold steps, tracing each seam between tiles, as though clinging to Margaret's melody. Sophie wheeled over, her eyes still rimmed red. "My mother was a hospital janitor," Jax said slowly, his voice strumming like wind across strings. "By day, she scrubbed floors. At night, she taught sick children to dance. She told me, 'Dance so the pain chases after you and never catches up.' I promised her the dance would never die." A faint smile crossed his lips, a fragile light in sorrow. Sophie sat still, her hands tapping a weak rhythm, joining the memory he carried. Graham, standing at a distance, caught every word. The sun struck the tiles, calling back Margaret's dream of healing through rhythm and motion. Ice in his heart thinned to warmth, like an old shaft of light breaking through glass. Then Graham's phone erupted, harsh as a war drum. The screen flashed. Lakeside News requests interview about homeless boy in Whitaker Tower. Across the street, cameras flared, shutters clicked, rumors spread like wildfire. The billionaire and the street kid. Hank entered with a triumphant smile. "See, sir? The whole city's buzzing about that drifter inside your tower. What do you think the shareholders will say?" Jax lowered his head, fists clenching the ragged cloth at his chest. His body shook, the faint scent of inked newsprint on the wind like a verdict about to fall. From a flicker of hope, fear rose heavy, pressing down hard. Sophie turned to her father, her voice breaking. "Don't listen to them, Dad. Jax gave me joy. If he's gone, I'll never laugh again." Her eyes were swollen, her hands gripping her wheels as if holding on to him. Graham stood silent, his gaze wavering. Before him lay two roads: shield Whitaker and company's reputation from a storm of headlines, or protect the boy who gave his daughter back her smile. The phone blared again, sharp and urgent, a call from the board demanding an answer. Sweat traced down his temple, his chest rising unevenly. He looked at Jax, then Sophie, his eyes searching for a way through. The wind off the lake tore at his silver hair. Jax stood firm, eyes wet but unyielding, awaiting judgment. Sophie clutched her chair, breath trembling. The air stretched taut, ready to snap. Graham opened his mouth, but the words vanished, swallowed by the ringing phone and the bitter wind. A choice hung, suspended, and the city's eyes waited for his verdict. Gray clouds pressed low over Chicago, heavy against the gleaming glass of Whitaker Tower. The wind off Lake Michigan howled, carrying the damp scent of rain. Graham Whitaker stood before a brutal choice: defend his reputation or believe in the boy who had lit his daughter's smile. Pressure from shareholders and the press had never felt tighter. In the vast living room, Graham's phone buzzed. A strategic partner's voice crackled through, cold as steel. "If that street kid stays linked to the Whitaker name, we pull our investment." Each word landed like a nail driven into his chest. Jax Rivera stood silently in the corner, hearing every syllable, his torn shirt gripped tight in shaking fists. The fragile hope Sophie had given him collapsed into suffocating dread. On the wall-mounted TV, the news anchor's sharp tone cut through the room. "City clears riverfront slums. Temporary shelters closed." Images showed the homeless, clutching thin blankets, huddled in the wind. Jax's legs buckled, the floor falling beneath him, his last refuge erased overnight. Sophie's hands slid from her wheels, limp as broken wings. "If Jax has nowhere left, I'll have no reason to smile again," she whispered, her voice fading, eyes glistening. Graham turned, meeting his daughter's gaze. His heart slammed, aching. One side, billions in shares, the empire he built. The other, a fragile heart that had staked its joy on a stray boy. The damp smell of rain slipped through the doorframe, mixing with heater smoke, thickening the air, pressing him toward collapse. Late that night, Graham stepped into the 30th floor boardroom. Harsh, fluorescent light spread across the long table, illuminating shareholders' faces and beaming onto the screen. "What are you doing, Graham?" "Whitaker and Company isn't a shelter for society's trash," one voice pressed. "An answer." "Now," demanded another. Graham's hand clenched, the icy water glass numbing his skin. Hank Dwyer cut in from the corner, his tone sharp as a blade. "If you don't end this, everything falls." Hope shrank to a thread. Graham felt cornered, torn apart. Keep Jax or save the empire? He lifted his head, ready to speak, but his throat locked, swallowed by the cold. That night, the rooftop garden glowed under quiet amber lamps. Jax crouched by the resonance path, staring at the mute tiles. The wind stirred faint echoes, whispers of Margaret's dream. His heart raced, recalling the blurry camera footage, the shadow slipping near the laundry hall. Someone had set him up. A crack of truth gleamed. Sophie wheeled out, her thin blanket flapping. She placed her small hand over Jax's. "Don't give up. The truth will come out," she said, voice weak but unwavering. Her words lit a spark in the night air. Jax raised his head, his eyes blazing, despair hardening into resolve. He squeezed Sophie's hand, nodding, an unspoken vow. Morning came. On Graham's desk lay an urgent press invitation, its final line chilling. "You must choose publicly, Company or the boy." He sat frozen at the window, staring out at a city shrouded in haze. Sophie wheeled close, her whisper steady, sharp with conviction. "I don't need the Company. I just need Jax to stay." Her eyes shone with both plea and courage. Jax stood on the terrace, fists clenched, heart pounding. He knew, if Graham chose reputation, every door would slam shut. The lake wind roared, scattering papers from the desk. Graham rose, his hand trembling on the steel door handle. The door swung open, flooding the room with blinding white light. Cameras clicked, reporters murmured, waiting. Graham drew a deep breath, chest heaving. Jack stood behind him, eyes burning, desperate for judgment. Sophie gripped her wheels, her breath unsteady. The air was taut as a string about to snap. Graham began to speak, words that would decide it all, but the sound vanished, swallowed by a sudden, cutting gust of wind. The wind from Lake Michigan roared, whipping ties and skirts of reporters packed around the rooftop garden. Camera shutters clicked in bursts, mingling with loudspeakers, echoing over the gleaming tiles of the resonance path. Graham Whitaker stood at the podium, his eyes blazing, ready to face the storm. Moments earlier, he'd stood at a crossroads, his company's reputation or his daughter's trust. Now he seized the chance to decide it all. Sunlight streamed through the glass, making the tiles glow softly like a river of light. Graham stepped forward, his dark suit holding tight against tense shoulders, but his eyes shone with resolve. The crowd's chatter faded into stillness, leaving only the hiss of wind and the low hum of cameras. From the edge of collapse, he now stood firm, like a captain steering into the gale. Graham gripped the microphone, his voice deep across the speakers. I, Graham Whitaker, am funding the Motion Lab Foundation, a center for therapy through art and movement for children. He paused, sweeping the crowd with his gaze. This was my wife, Margaret's dream. Reporters gasped, pens scratching furiously. A shareholder leapt up, face flushed red. You're insane. You'd choose a street kid over your company's name? Graham met his stare, voice steel hard. No, I choose justice and truth. The air ignited, as if a match had struck dry grass. The crowd held its breath, lenses locked on him. From the defensive, he had turned to defiance, pulling the entire city into a defining moment. Hank Dwyer stormed forward, waving a folder high, fury etched across his face. Truth? He's a thief. Security saw him lurking here. But Graham raised a hand, silencing him. The giant screen behind lit up, showing a clearer clip from the laundry hallway. Margaret's antique watch slipped from a janitor's cleaning tray, tumbling into a bin. Never touched by Jax. Murmurs surged like a wave. Hank's face drained pale, his grip crushing the crumpled papers in his hand. Graham's eyes cut into him. You doctored reports to destroy a child. As of now, you're fired. His voice sliced sharp, cold as lake wind. The crowd erupted in cheers mixed with outrage. Hank stood frozen, his face ashen, collapsing under the weight of public shame. From power, he had plunged into disgrace, left without a foothold. Jack stepped forward, his bare feet trembling on the cold tiles. The microphone shook in his hands, but his eyes blazed. My mother was a hospital janitor. By day, she scrubbed floors. At night, she taught sick kids to dance so they could forget the pain. His voice was quiet but carried clearly, like wind across strings. I don't dance for money. I dance to keep the last smile alive. The garden stilled. Cameras zoomed close on his thin, glowing face. The crowd's eyes shifted from doubt to reverence. Sophie's hands shook as she pushed her chair onto the resonance path. Wind tossed her hair, her thin blanket snapping. Jax, let me try, she whispered, her voice weak but unyielding. Jax rushed to her, clasping her small hand, eyes flashing with courage. Graham stood still, his chest tight, breath caught. Sophie set her fragile foot on a glowing tile. Tick. Its tone rang long, like Margaret's voice calling from memory. She steadied herself, gripping Jax, then rose, her frail body standing tall enough to take 3 trembling steps. The rooftop erupted in cheers, cameras flashing wildly. Tears streamed down Graham's face, salty in the wind. Fear melted into courage as the city bore witness to his daughter's first steps. The crowd roared Sophie's name, then turned to Jax, their eyes lit with respect. Yet beneath the cheers, dissenting voices broke through. It's only a moment. Will shareholders accept a homeless kid? The words blew cold, seeding doubt. Cameras swung back to Graham. He gripped the mic tighter, his gaze fixed on Jax, then Sophie, both watching, waiting for his final declaration. The lake wind howled, scattering papers into the flashing storm of shutters. Graham drew breath, chest heaving. The words he spoke next would decide everything, not just Jax's fate, but the legacy he and Margaret had built. The air was strung tight, ready to snap, and the city's eyes clung to him, waiting. Cheers from the press conference still echoed, but the hallways of Whitaker Tower had turned cold. Neon light washed over Hank Dwyer's pale face. Graham had just fired him in public, choosing justice and his daughter over deceit. Security guards averted their eyes, no longer offering greetings. One whispered, "He's really finished," exposed in front of the whole city. Hank clenched his fists, the scent of burnt tobacco lingering on his jacket, but his power was gone, scattered like smoke in the lake wind. Up on the rooftop garden, warm amber lights glowed. Graham stepped forward, his voice steady through the speakers. From this day, Jax will have a home, an education, and a place as a training partner at the Motion Lab. Reporters scribbled furiously, cameras flashing nonstop. Jax Rivera stood silent, unfazed by the bursts of light. Sophie's soft cheer carried through the air. Jax, you don't have to sleep on the streets anymore. His bare feet trembled, yet the stone beneath him felt strangely warm. The sense of wet grass, damp soil, and lavender wrapped around him, smelling like home. From uncertainty, his heart steadied, as if he had reached safe harbor after a storm. Sophie wheeled close, her eyes glowing, her small hand gripping his, holding the moment tight. The next morning, golden light spilled across the garden. Sophie rolled slowly onto the resonance path, Jax walking beside her, his hand lightly on the chair. I want to try, she whispered, her voice frail but determined. Jax nodded, his eyes following every movement like a guide against the wind. Sophie set her delicate foot on the tile. Tick, tick. The gentle tones rang. Her hands shook on the frame, but she braced herself. One step, two, then three. A clear laugh burst out, bright as silver bells across the garden. Dr. Elena Ruiz stood at a distance, scribbling notes, her eyes shining with emotion. This isn't a miracle. This is hope, she said softly, her voice full of conviction. Graham watched from the balcony, his doubt melting into belief. His hardened face softened, his slow smile recalling Margaret's gentle one, something he thought he had lost forever. In the days that followed, Whitaker Tower no longer felt like a fortress of glass. Its doors opened wide, welcoming children to experience the motion lab. The tiles of the garden sang with music, laughter replacing the old winds. Sophie circled the flower beds, Jax by her side, his smile glowing like sunlight. Applause rose from the children, from Mrs. Patel, from staff who once doubted. Suspicion gave way to shared joy, like spring breaking through ice. But as the garden lights dimmed, Sophie sat down, her breath shallow, her hands cold. Her radiant smile faded, her eyes flickering with unease. Graham dropped to his knees, holding her close, listening to her trembling heartbeat. He realized the road to healing was not all light. Every step forward could stumble, as cold winds struck without warning. Jack stood near, watching Sophie, then Graham. His eyes burned with resolve, steady like a flame refusing to die. Inside, a vow ignited. I won't let this light fade, he whispered, soft but sure, as if promising himself. Sophie lifted her gaze, touching his hand, her eyes answering, weak but full of hope. The lake wind swept through, carrying lavender's scent mixed with damp concrete. The garden stayed still, the tick, tick of the tiles echoing like a heartbeat of new beginnings. Yet in the midst of joy, a question lingered. Would Sophie keep those steps when the subsequent trial came? Graham gripped his daughter's hand, eyes cast far ahead, heavy with worry. Jack stood tall, his thin shoulders squared, ready to face whatever storm awaited. Autumn light stretched across Lake Michigan, amber shimmering against the towering glass of Whitaker Tower. The wind carried a faint salt tang, mingling with lavender from the rooftop garden, a gentle harmony between city and nature. Sophie had taken her first steps on the resonance path, bringing joy, yet the road to healing still loomed with trials. Now the garden had become a place of reunion. On the resonance path, Sophie rose unsteadily, her hand gripping Jax Rivera's. The tiles sang, tick, tick, like a heartbeat returning. Each step was slow but sure, her thin legs straining beneath the sun. Jax walked beside her, eyes glowing, his calloused hand ready to steady her. Graham Whitaker followed closely, eyes damp, watching every fragile move of his daughter. From loss, the garden now bloomed with warmth and belonging. Sophie managed a few more steps before faltering, her legs trembling. Jax caught her small hand tightening around his. Graham rushed forward, his strong arms embracing them both, a wall against the lake's cold wind. In that moment, the lines between billionaire and street boy, between father and child, between weakness and strength, dissolved. Three hearts beat as one. Sophie's laughter rang out, silver bright in the air. From lonely pride, Graham opened his heart and found the warmth he thought was gone. Weeks later, the motion lab opened right there in the rooftop garden. Children filled the space, their feet striking tiles that sang melodies. sweeping away the old chill. Their laughter spread like sunlight through gray clouds. Jax hung a framed photo of his mother on the central wall, beside a plaque etched with the words, "Joy is strength." His hands trembled, but held firm, his eyes wet with light. "Mom, I did it," he whispered, his voice soft as wind on strings. Sophie sat nearby, her hands clapping to the rhythm of the tiles, her eyes bright. "Jax, your mom must be smiling now," she said, her voice clear as glass. Graham rested a hand on Jax's shoulder, a gentle smile breaking across his face, echoing Margaret's. He stood quietly, gazing at the garden alive with hope, his doubts shifting into belief. The community now guarded a new legacy, compassion above reputation. As sunset fell, the rooftop garden glowed in deep amber. Sophie stood again, walking a few more steps, steadier this time. Jax walked close, smiling widely, his hand brushing her chair, her constant companion. Graham followed slowly, a quiet anchor behind them. "You've done so well," he said softly, his voice breaking, his eyes never leaving her. Sophie turned back, cheeks flushed, her smile radiant in the fading light. The three stopped together on the glowing path, holding each other close. The tiles hummed a warm chorus, blending with lake wind and children's laughter. Tragedy was gone. Only reunion remained. Three lives bound in love. The garden, once a fortress of cold, had become a place of healing, its doors open to every heart. But as the light dimmed, Sophie sank into her chair, her breath uneven. Graham knelt, clutching her hand, feeling the fragile rhythm of her heart. Jack stood firm beside them, eyes alight with a fire that wouldn't die. "Wealth has its price," he said, his voice low but steady, "but kindness is the only true worth." The moment lingered, the garden bathed in amber. The tiles still whispered, but a question hung in the air. Could this journey of healing endure when the next storm came? Sophie clutched Jax's hand, her eyes bright yet fragile. Graham looked out across the lake, his heart heavy. The road ahead promised setbacks, and though united, all three knew the trials were far from over. Chicago woke beneath a misty dawn, Lake Michigan shimmering like a mirror reflecting storms now past. Graham Whitaker, once locked inside his fortress of pride, had opened his heart, choosing love over a cold empire. Sophie, the little girl once imprisoned by grief and motionless legs, found light again through laughter. And Jax Rivera, the boy who wandered the streets under false accusation, proved that kindness burns brighter than prejudice. From the days when harsh winds battered Whitaker Tower, when Hank Dwyer's lies spread injustice, they had endured. The truth of the lost watch was revealed, justice restored, and the rooftop garden became a beacon, where children discovered hope through the motion lab. Beneath the vast sky, the city no longer stood alone. Out of the shadows of suspicion, compassion spread its light, breaking prejudice, mending wounds. Injustice gave way to justice. Lost trust turned to hope, like fresh winds sweeping old streets. And to every heart listening now, share your thoughts below and join us for the story still to come, where kindness always finds a way forward. When you stand at the edge between doubt and humanity, what will you choose? Compassion is the flame that guides us through the dark, and it will never die.